Thank you for having me. It's always such a blast to be with you here in San Diego, especially because I get to miss 2 days of carpool and sort of travel baseball shenanigans. So, and especially to get to do that, to talk not just about C.S. Lewis, who's always fun, but to talk about his book, Paralandra. Dan asked me to speak last year when he asked me to speak about, you guys planned this way in advance. He just told me what I'm supposed to speak about next year. He said, you're going to talk about Genesis 3 and Perelandra, and I said, oh yeah, great, I love that book. I hadn't read it. You know. I'd read the first of the space trilogy, which is called Out of the Silent Planet, and I had not gotten to Perelandra, so I did don't worry, I've read it now. I've got some things to say about it. I'll give you a little bit of background about it. So first of all, we call it the space trilogy. It's, if there can be any part of C.S. Lewis's oeuvre that is slightly less well-known, or sort of kind of the 301 course, it would be these books. This is Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. They're good, but they're just a little out there, you know? They're out there. They're a little psychedelic, to be honest with you. You don't really think, I mean, you guys have made him look a little psychedelic here, but I guess he's got a pipe. But look at how this is what the original covers to Paralandra look like. It was called Voyage to Venus for the American edition. And any book that can inspire these three covers is dealing with some imagery, you know? There's a lot to be said, and I especially think, I don't know if anyone here likes the show Arrested Development, but there's a never nude. It turns out in one of the, you can see that is Dr. Ransom wearing like some tight hot pants in that last one. So I thought we should see these though to know what we're dealing with. When you go into Paralandra, do not go in expecting a traditional science fiction book. Okay, while he was very deeply influenced by H.G. Wells, this, like a lot of his work, you know, it's not a plot-driven sci-fi kind of, just absolute barn burner, but it's also not a book of straight theology. It's Lewis in his wonderful way doing kind of both, but not doing either. He's being playful, he's being creative, and that's one of the reasons why we love him. And in fact, this book ends with something called the Great Dance sequence, which goes on and on and on, and it's some of the most literary stuff he ever wrote. And come to find out, it's what he was, one of the pieces of writing he was the most proud of. At the end of his life, when he was asked what his best work was, he said, "Till we have faces," but the one he's most proud of was Perelandra. And partly that's because this is a book, by the way, we call it the Space Trilogy. He didn't want it to be called the Space Trilogy. He notoriously wanted it to either be called the Ransom Trilogy or the Heavens Trilogy. He was a medievalist, as you may know, and he was trying to reconfigure us thinking about outer space. He wanted to constitute it as the heavens rather than as space. So it's a little ironic that we call it the thing he didn't want it to be called. But if you're going to do that with any book, it would be this one, because this is a book about an unfallen world. And I think that's why he was so proud of it, to enter into a sort of a counterfactual what-if scenario where you are narrating a trip to a world that has not fallen from grace. And so let me give you a little bit, of the plot. We're not going to do too much plot work because, again, it gets a little strange. This hero of this book is Dr. Elwin Ransom. And Dr. Ransom is also in Out of the Silent Planet. He's also in That Hideous Strength. He's the never nude in the image that we saw. He is a philologist, so that's a little bit of a shout out to Tolkien as making him the great hero here. And at the beginning of this book, Lewis writes himself in as the narrator, but that's kind of a red herring. Dr. Ransom is summoned by God, who is called Meleldil in this universe. And he's summoned to go to Venus, because something's happening in Venus and Ransom is needed. He is sent there in a coffin. So the Christian symbolism is not, on the back burner, okay? He has to die in order to become of use to God. he is sent in a coffin, and the way that he's flown there, he flies by the sun and gets really tan on one side of his body and not the other. So this is, anytime you see other covers of this book, if you see a guy who looks like Sia, if you know who the singer, like who's half sort of tan, half pale, that's why, because he just had he wasn't, it wasn't even. So when he gets there, when he gets to Venus, and Venus is called Perelandra, so Paralandra is the word for Venus here, he encounters two things. Let's go to the first slide here. This is, again, a slightly over the top, and by that I mean incredibly over the top, illustration, painting by John Lewicki from 1962 or something, of Paralandra. And this is Ransom. You have to be naked. Remember, this is an unfallen world. And he encounters floating islands. There's no solid ground on Paralandra, save one mountain called the Fixed Land. But he encounters what he calls the Green Lady. Her real name is Tinadril. She is the Eve of this world, and she's green. So this is Ransom approaching the Green Lady. You'll see all sorts of strange creatures and these bubble things growing on trees, which is actually how he gets water. And there's a lot of talk of kind of beasts and everyone living in harmony. Again, this is an unfallen world. So what is it like? Yes, on an unfallen world, there are fish you can ride on, like dolphins, right? There are dragons you can play tag with. There's all elements of kind of fruit that falls off into your hands. But then once he starts talking to the Green Lady, remember he's a philologist, so he can learn her language really quickly, he finds out that while they can speak, there's so many concepts that she simply has no awareness of. One of the concepts, of course, is death. She has no conception of death. She does not have a conception of pain. She does not have any conception of scarcity or really even longing for anything that she does not have. You see, Tinadril, the Green Lady, lives in perfect harmony with the other creatures on the floating islands and in perfect dependency on God, on Maleldil. For her, and for Lewis, wanting to paint a picture of what it looks like to live in an unfallen world, there is no distinction between what is and what should be. There is no distinction between what you want to do and what you are doing. There's no longing. She tells him his bidding is a joy when he questions why she does this and not the other. Why does she continue to do exactly what Maleldil has her do? She utters the famous line, "How can we not obey what we love?" So she's perfectly content, perfectly happy. You know the Buddhist saying of happiness is not getting what you want, it's wanting what you have. In that sense, that's Tinadril. She wants what she has, and there's no discrepancy there. It's also a great, I think, illustration. What he's doing is perhaps as an Anglican, there is one of our prayers for the fifth Sunday of Lent is the following one. You can go to the next slide. This is a wonderful prayer. Almighty God, you alone can bring into order the unruly wills and affection of sinners. Grant your people grace to love what you command and desire what you promise, that among the swift and varied changes of the world, our hearts may surely there be fixed where true joys are to be found through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. To love what thou commands and to desire what thou promises. This is life on Paralandra. This is the unfallen world, and it's beautifully done. I highly commend it to you. Of course, things happen, right? Things happen. It would be a very boring book if it just remained like that. But what we're seeing in a picture of Perelandra, which is a picture of the Garden of Eden, really, is dependency. is a pure relationship of dependency on God and receptivity. She talks about accepting the waves that come, as opposed to like big waves and small waves, because you're undulating on the water all the time. She says, I just accept what is given. That is where joy is to be found. The fruit that I eat I do not worry about the one that I expected. I just enjoy the one that I eat. There's a lot of talk of this. She's utterly unperturbed about taking life as it comes. There's zero anxiety. But Ransom discovers that there is one command, one curious command other than to eat and sleep and be merry, and that is that that Tinadril and her husband, or the king, Tor, who's really not seen in the book almost at all, is that they're not allowed to sleep on the fixed land. So he does spy one island that is not moving, and it's a vast island, and they are forbidden from sleeping there. And this is, of course, a very curious thing to Ransom. He says, why is that? And she says, why? Because Maleldil says it so. That's enough for me. Okay, that's where it begins. It continues when Dr. Weston shows up. Dr. Weston is the villain from the first book who kidnapped Ransom and took him to Mars. He's back. He's back, and he appears to be a little reformed at first. He starts talking about the life force, and anyone who reads Lewis in this period, there's sometimes where he's like shadowboxing with strains of contemporary, English pedagogy that make no sense, or you just have to know who he's talking to. So there's a little bit of that. He's talking about scientism as it was in the 1940s. This book came out in 1943, by the way. But there's a lot more to it. So Dr. Weston shows up, and he is there to corrupt the Green Lady. He is on a mission from the Bent One, which is really the sort of the fallen angel, Satan. And it soon becomes clear that he is an agent of the Bent One. And in fact, we watch as Dr. Weston, who appears human at first, is sort of overtaken by a demonic presence. And Ransom calls him the unman. He becomes the unman. So what the unman does, he tries to tempt the Green Lady. And he does it in a couple ways that shed light on Genesis 3. But I'll just say before, by the way, he comes on pompous as it can be, just like that serpent in the garden saying, did God really say that? One of Tim Keller, the Presbyterian preacher, has such a great series of sermons on this where he always says, an attitude always precedes an argument. And you'll notice that the fall from grace begins with a sneer. And you have a sneering serpent, and you have a sneering Dr. Weston. Let's go to the next slide real quick. This is, actually, go back. Sorry, wrong slide. No, yeah. Go to the next, there you go. Okay. So the way Weston tries to tempt the Green Lady is through, to undermine the dependency that she has on Maleldil, right? And he does it in two ways, both of which are a way, his attempt to actually undermine trust in the goodness of Maleldil. You'll notice, and Lewis brilliantly does this, where the devil, the unman, the serpent character here, does not go after the existence of Maleldil or belief, actually, in Maleldil. He goes after trust in Maleldil. He goes after the goodness of Maleldil. He's not sort of there to be a new atheist. He's there to say, actually, did God really say? So how does he do it? He first does it through introducing discontent, through the disappointment of expectations. He continues to ask the lady, what if that next fruit that you encounter on your walk when you're hungry, what if it's not the one you expected? Won't you be disappointed? What if Maleldil does not give you what you want? Now we're in the realm here on earth again, this anxiety, that we have that Scott just so beautifully talked about God is not going to give me what I want. That's what we're afraid of. We're so anxious. I have an idea of how my life needs to go, and I'm afraid that God's not going to agree or get it right, so I need to control the situation. There's a mistrust that lies behind the sin in the garden and the sin that Weston is trying to engineer on Perelandra. It is this suspicion that God will not deliver on his promises that leads us to take rather than to receive, to violate the law of receptivity that seems to be so beautifully borne out on Paralandra. And, once you get into, though, it is more blessed to take than to receive, or you have to take because you will not receive. That anxiety accounts for the human will to power, which we see played out in every imaginable scenario. So that's the first thing he does. He tries to say, well, what if you don't get the thing that you expect? It hasn't occurred to her before to expect something other than what she's given. But he sort of drives this little wedge in there. But secondly, he tries to subvert or to reframe Maleldil's command about the fixed island, okay? To see through God's intention. What in the world could be wrong with sleeping on fixed ground? Let's look at the actual exchange that they have. It's a very telling one. Weston says, these other commands of his, to love, to sleep, to fill this world with your children, you see for yourself that they are good, and they are the same in all worlds, but the command against living on the fixed island is not so. You have already learned that he gave no such command to my world, and you cannot see where the goodness of it is. No wonder. If it were really good, must he have not commanded it to all worlds alike? For how could Maleldil not command what was good? There is no good in it. Maleldil himself is showing you that this moment through your own reason. It is mere command. It is forbidding for the mere sake of forbidding. This is the words of the tempter here. Tinadrill says, but why? Weston, well, in order that you may break it. What other reason can there be? It is not good. It is not the same for other worlds. It stands, this injunction not to sleep on the fixed island, it stands between you and all settled life, all command of your own days. Maleldil longs, oh, how greatly he longs to see his creature become fully itself, to stand up in its own reason and its own courage, even against him. What he's saying is that God hasn't been forthright with you. That's what Scott said in his devotion. That's the seed of mistrust that's being planted and sort of cultivated here. God, Maleldil really actually does want you to sleep on the fixed ground. It's all a test. It's all a ruse. It's all a cosmic game that Dan talked about last night. This is the only way that you will outgrow God and finally come into your own. What Maleldil really wants for his children is independence, to let go of his hand, to be able to decide for ourselves what is good. So you see how it's working out. It's very similar to Genesis 3, where sin, the serpent, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, actually I think he said it more like this, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it or you will die. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So, the same basic thing has happened. Sin, vertically directed, is a matter of taking matters into our own hands. Pun intended. And for that reason, it's not a fall so much as a reaching up to become like God. One of my favorite preachers put it this way. He says, what we call the fall from paradise, the fall into a life in the world of sin and death, is really a misnomer. The deepest ill represented in the Genesis account is temptation to believe the serpent's word, that we will be like God. So instead of a fall, it is a grasping for something higher. We see not a fall, but as a desire for a kind of spiritual ascendancy. A denial of our creatureliness, a denial of what I call our low anthropology. It is a move away from receptivity and dependence toward self-sufficiency and control, and therein lies the whole kahuna. You'll note, again, that the serpent and Weston do not go after the existence of God. They go after the goodness of God. Satan did not destroy belief in God, but trust in God. He goes after faith. It's the same thing that Jesus is trying to create. Satan goes after faith. If you obey God, you'll miss out. You'll not thrive and mature. You won't be happy. As an aside, we know that the opposite of this is actually true. If you don't trust in the love of God, you will never stop hustling. Every single moment of the day will become an opportunity for justifying yourself, for earning love, for having a place on the planet. So never stop hustling. Now in the book, you probably know, Tinadrill does not succumb. We get the sense that she would have succumbed had ransom not been sent. Ransom is able to shut down the unman before the terrible ascendancy happens. So she is saved by a form of outside intervention, and there is the famous line where basically the Christ God character looks at ransom and says, "It is not for nothing that you were named ransom." But thus we are never really able to witness the principal fruits of sin, which Genesis 3 tells us are really blame and shame, resentment and hiding. These do not exist on Paralandra. Resentment and hiding, blame and shame. I mean, that's how I like to, if sin, vertically speaking, is sort of a trying to become like God and put ourselves in the place of God, horizontally, I think the easiest shorthand for sin is blame shifting. She did it. No, he did it. No, it's actually the screen's fault. Sin is a willingness to throw anyone else under the bus to justify ourselves. Your life to enhance mine, not mine to enhance yours. Of course, the story of the rest of the Bible is the story of the gospel, of God seeking out those who hide, of redeeming those who are ashamed, those who have been exposed in their guilt. God going out in love. This finds its ultimate expression, of course, in Jesus Christ, who, at the end of the book, we find him in another garden of Gethsemane with another command about a tree. We watch as Jesus climbs the tree of death and turns it into a tree of life. If in the Garden of Eden we put ourselves in God's place on the cross, he puts himself in ours. This is the grace of God. The role of the Christian, if there's any role to be given, is simply a return to the receptivity and dependence we see in Perelandra. Acceptance, passivity, these are the virtues of life in Perelandra. And it is profoundly good news, and I thought for the rest of my talk this morning, I want to venture a contemporary version of what this actually looks like, what life on Paralandra looks like on earth. And it is captured in the slogan, "Blessed are the type Bs." Blessed are the type Bs. Now, we're living in a time that is obsessed with personality tests, right? Personality typologies. And the most common one, the most ubiquitous one, is actually not the Enneagram. It is type A, type B. You can drop your Enneagram number into casual conversation, and if they're Christians, they might get it, but only other mixed company, some people will look at you oddly. Myers-Briggs code, a few more may know it because they were forced to do it by their HR department or something. But if you describe someone as a real type A, odds are you won't need to extrapolate. That person is a go-getter. They are driven, they are high energy, they are assertive. They're not what you'd call chill, but they're type A. Here's a great cartoon that sort of captures this. Let's look at it. Type B, type A. Whoa, slow down, friend. What happens next? Don't you know that sometimes you have to stop and smell the flowers? Next one. Flower-smelling champion. Type B. And the type B is like, ah! Crazy. I mean, I think unlike most of the other personality, or like all of the personality types we use today, it's just a shorthand that can be useful and can be unuseful. No one is strictly one thing or another. God wasn't sorting people into 2 buckets at creation. He also wasn't sorting them into 9 buckets, okay? The A-B distinction was coined in the mid-1970s by 2 very nice Jewish cardiologists, Meyer Friedman and Ray Rosenman, to characterize those who found their way to their operating tables. So-called type A's or alphas tended to lead more stressful lives, leading to greater risk of heart disease. The more laid-back betas went easier on their arteries, right? The distinction was an anecdotal one, and it does not hold up to scientific scrutiny at all. Not that that has ever stopped something from entering our vernacular. Now, we live in a aggressively type A culture. I think this is sort of a result of the fall, of the grasping. It is a culture of grasping, but it's a culture in which this distinction has taken on a moral dimension. Our heroes today are what? They're entrepreneurs. They're not poets. Those are our cultural heroes. Stop waiting, start living, we are told. And technology allows us to make those slogans a reality. And if you've actually spent any time in a cardiologist's office recently, you'll notice in the waiting room, no one is actually idle. Everyone is, texting away. The message is clear. Activity is better than passivity. Passive type B-ness is akin to incompetence and resignation and just non-seriousness. You only live once, so you better get after it. Never stop grinding. Hustle, hustle, hustle. Here along comes the gospel, the Christian faith, and says, blessed are the type B's. Blessed are the type B's. Think of it as a variation on the don't just do something, sit there. Because when it comes to the spiritual life of a Christian, passivity trumps activity. In fact, your endless activity may be a problem when it comes to experiencing healing, goodness, and God. The less you bring to the table, the better. Faith in practice often looks a whole lot like patience, aka waiting, aka not doing anything. Now we're on firm ground here when I'm talking to you about this, because in his preface to his commentary on Galatians, Martin Luther himself drew things out further. He lists a few different forms of what he calls active righteousness, civil, cultural, and ethical, before subordinating all of them to the passive righteousness that we are given on account. You could show this is Luther's commentary on the Galatians. Tim Keller himself translated Luther's words thusly: there is another righteousness far above the others, which Paul calls the righteousness of faith. It is Christian righteousness. God imputes it to us apart from our works. In other words, it is passive righteousness, as the others are active. For we do nothing for it. We give nothing for it. We only receive it. We're back in Paralandra. The passive righteousness is a mystery that the world cannot understand. Indeed, Christians never completely understand it themselves. This is still Luther. And thus do not take advantage of it when they are troubled or tempted. And so we have to constantly teach it, repeat it, and work it out in practice. Anyone who does not understand this righteousness or cherish it in the heart and conscience will continually be buffeted by fears and depression. Nothing gives peace like this passive righteousness. I rest only upon the righteousness of Christ, which I do not produce, but receive. Receptivity, my friends, it is a Christian virtue, and it is one that Luther is in a full agreement with Lewis on as relates to Perelandra. And of course, we don't just see this on Paralandra. We see it in Jesus Christ. We come together here to worship the man who prayed, "Not my will, but thine be done," who went silent before Pilate, who did not hang himself on a cross, but was hung there by those he came to save. And so the voices we hear 6 days a week from both outside and within tell us that any good thing we get in life will be something we earn. It will be something we take. Blessed are the self-starters. But that is the voice of Dr. Weston, okay? That is not the voice of Dr. Ransom. Because Christianity says the opposite. It says any good thing you're going to get in life is going to be something you receive, something that is given to you. The work of a Christian, to the extent it can be called work, involves the emptying of one's hands to receive such gifts, and come to find out God empties them for us, right? Such that our life, the life of receptivity, is the life of grace. We talk about, grace is really synonymous with gift, at least in the Pauline usage. I caught a beautiful example, and a very funny example of this from the pop poet Billy Collins. He has a poem that we're about to hear where he talks about the incongruity of a love and the way that receptivity is actually the great defining trait of love. Let's watch it here. It's called The Lanyard.
So, The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even.
Now, isn't that the most beautiful picture? He didn't really even make it. It's a Christian, it's a monergistic thing. The counselor made the lanyard. And there's nothing, but somehow it's not of any use to the mother. And yet she gives everything and he gives nothing. And that's somehow enough. And this is the way love works, is that we receive. Receptivity is the great Christian virtue. Now, to close, I want to say that that is what it looks like to journey back to Perelandra, to the extent that it is possible. As Christians, we simply receive this beautiful gospel word of forgiveness of sin and everlasting life through the blood of Christ. But for some of us, that's not enough. We need something extra special. And we got it, fortunately, last week. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about Hackney Diamonds. Do you know what Hackney Diamonds is? It's the wrong crowd. Come on, guys. Hackney Diamonds, which came out on the 20th of October, is the 26th and presumably final album by a little rock group called the Rolling Stones. Ever heard of them? All right. Mick Jagger is 80 years old. Keith Richards, by the sheer grace of God and Maleldil combined, is 79 years old, okay? So what I'm about to show you, I don't want you to watch and think these guys are just too old to be doing what they're doing. They're doing the only thing they know how to do. They're being who God clearly created them to be. And they're doing something completely unprecedented in human history as far as I can tell. No one has done what they're doing right now, playing rock and roll music as octogenarians, all right? They've slowly gotten us used to this idea, but no one thought it was ever going to happen. Now, the very last song on what is presumed to be the final Rolling Stones record is called Rolling Stone Blues, and it is a cover of the Muddy Waters blues tune that gave them their name, all right? But you're not going to hear that one tonight. This morning, excuse me. What we're going to hear is the very last original Rolling Stones song, the last Jagger Richards composition, which is not a valedictory response. It's not saying, we made it 60 years. All of us have been married many times. And yet this marriage lasted somehow. We are a rock band that is 60 years old. That is a contradiction in terms. So we're witnessing, what we're about to witness is a miracle. I'm convinced, okay? This is why you guys have the token guy here to do this, all right? What they decided to do with their very final song is to do a hymn of receptivity. And it's a hymn of receptivity of grace. It's called The Sweet Sounds of Heaven. We're not in space, we're in heaven. And it's by far the most Lutheran, to say nothing of Christian song they've ever recorded. And by that I mean it's a gospel song, but it's a gospel song about the word coming through hearing. It's about the sounds of heaven. And it's not only about that, it's about the gifts of God being bread and wine and the water of baptism. But don't worry, they're not here to check any boxes that you need them to check. They're simply singing the only song that could make sense and be good news at their stage of the game. And that's where we're going to end. So let's roll the tape.
I hear the sweet, sweet sound of heaven.
All right, so you got all your sacraments in there. But you got real sinners, not theoretical sinners. You got real sinners singing a hymn to Paralandra with the last breath in their body, and I think that's beautiful, and that's where I want to leave you. Thank you for having me.